The new grudge system has two serious bugs. Creative Assembly is aware of them and they expect to fix them fairly quickly. But until these bugs are fixed, you'll have to modify the way you play if you want to get the most out of the new grudge system. Here you can see I've just crushed my 5th Age of Reckoning, got a free elite grudge settler army, and I've got this buff for 10 turns, giving me plus 50 growth in all provinces, plus 5 control, minus 50 upkeep for all of my grudge settler units. Not this army is completely free, but I can also recruit some new grudge settler units that I get awarded at the end of the Age of Reckoning. But there is a bug with the Age of Reckoning, and as you get into the later turns, you'll find it hard to consistently keep crushing your grudges like I have if you don't understand how the bug works. Bug number one is to do with the way the total grudges are calculated. The game takes every faction that you've met, tallies up the total number of grudges on all of that faction's settlements and armies, adds all of the factions totals together, giving you a total amount of every grudge that you know of at that point in the game. Every 10 turns, a new Age of Reckoning begins, and you get a reward based on what percentage of those total grudges that you put right. It's a sort of living system, and the grudges in the game are generated dynamically by every action the AI takes in the game. An AI army trespasses on dwarf lands, that's a grudge. They attack a dwarf army or settlement, that's more grudges. If another army of that faction incurs a grudge, a fraction of that grudge will be added to every army in that faction. If a completely different faction incurs a grudge, a fraction of those grudges will be added to every faction of the same race. The dwarfs will hold you responsible for your entire race's actions. If you destroy enemy settlements and armies with enough grudges, you'll get rewards, faction buffs, free elite grudge settler units, and if you reach 100% of your target by the end of the Age of Reckoning, you also receive a free elite grudge settler army. But there is a catch. As you venture out to crush more grudges, you meet new factions who also have grudges that need to be crushed. This won't do anything immediately. Your target number of grudges that's set at the beginning of the Age of Reckoning stays the same. But at the end of 10 turns, once a new Age of Reckoning starts, the total grudges will be calculated again from the total grudges on all the factions that you now know. If you expand slowly and deliberately and crush each new enemy one at a time, you'll likely have little trouble putting a satisfactory number of grudges right in each Age of Reckoning. So far so good. But this is where bug number 1 comes into it. The total grudge target for each Age of Reckoning is calculated by totaling up all of the grudges for every faction that you've met by any means. If you make an alliance, then you'll get vision over new factions that neighbor onto your new ally. If you use diplomacy to declare war on undiscovered factions, you'll also discover those factions' grudges. If you teleport to a quest battle location, you'll meet every faction that your army can see from the battle location. If you confederate a dead faction, like Grombrindal's got 0 settlements now, then it won't give you any new vision. But if I confederate a large distant faction like Thorek with 10 settlements, I suddenly get vision over a huge swath of land with many new factions. So in my real campaign, on turns 40 to 50, I had to put right 20,400 grudges if I wanted to absolutely max out Nollengrom and get the maximum buff possible. I was able to successfully do that, and then on my next Age of Reckoning, turn 50 plus, because I'd expanded a little bit, it went up to about 24,000. Now, if instead of just expanding slowly and carefully, I make an alliance with every faction I can, I declare war on every undiscovered faction I can find, I teleport across the world to quest battles, and I confederate Thorek, then my new Age of Reckoning target, instead of being 24,000 grudges, is 57,000 grudges. Once you're into the mid game and you've already built up your settlements and your factions, it's not such a big deal, but it's entirely possible to do this in the early game. Your first Age of Reckoning target will probably be around 2,000 to 3,000. But if you go out and meet tons of factions as fast as you can potentially blow that up to 20 or 30,000 in the early game. And it's not so much the penalty. -3 control, -25 growth, and increased grudge settler upkeep is not really that big of a problem, but it's more the missed opportunity. Dwarfs actually have pretty good growth now. You can get +20 growth building, put one of these in each of your 3 regions, that's +60 growth on top of the base growth that all of your settlements get as well. So dwarfs actually get quite a lot of growth. But on top of that, if you're hitting your Nollengrom every time, you're going to get +50 growth on top of that to all of your provinces. So your provinces actually grow really fast as dwarfs now, and you want to take advantage of that. So in order to make it easier to hit that Nollengrom every single time, you want to keep your vision small and don't unnecessarily get vision on any factions that you don't need to be able to see. And don't be too scared of these high numbers that you see later in the game of 20,000, 30,000 grudges that you need to get. In the early game, when settlements and enemy armies only have a couple of hundred grudges each, then it seems like it'll be hard to hit 3,000. But in the later game, when settlements have 1,600, 900, 1,000, and if you run into a big bad enemy like Azag or Wurzag or Grimgor or something, they might have 3,000 or 4,000 grudges just on one army. Don't get me wrong, this definitely is a bug. It definitely is a problem that really needs to be fixed. Confederations, alliances, teleporting to quest battles, those are all core game mechanics that the player should definitely be encouraged to do, not discouraged from doing. But don't get the idea that the game's unplayable in 5.0 or that you should avoid dwarfs. The new grudge mechanic is amazing. The procedural way that it actually tallies up the grudges dynamically based on the real actions that each individual army does on the campaign map is so cool. Light years ahead of the super basic old grudge system we had, where it would just spawn these grudge quests whenever an enemy army did something. This new system is amazing, but this bug definitely needs to be fixed. In the meantime, you can still have a lot of fun with the new grudge system. I found it pretty manageable once I understood how the bug worked, but it does mean that for the time being, until it's patched, there's some noob traps. If you take one of these confederation dilemmas early on, that's going to instantly give you vision on your new territory, and after 10 turns when you get your next Age of Reckoning, that target's going to be higher than it would have been. For Belegar, it doesn't really matter too much, especially if you are planning on expanding in this direction towards Karakern anyway. It's going to give you vision on a few new factions, but if you were going to go up here anyway, maybe fight Scrag, you would have got vision on those factions anyway. On the other hand, if you're playing as Thorek, who's way down here, and then you confederate Karak Azul, who's way up here, then that's going to instantly give you heaps and heaps of new grudges. So that once you get your next Age of Reckoning, it's going to make it harder for you to hit Nollengrom and get all of those boosts that you should be able to get. Using diplomacy to get some free money by declaring war on distant factions, that's going to mean that it's going to be harder to get your Age of Reckoning because you're going to have vision on more grudges next time. So for now, keep it small, keep your vision limited to a smaller number of factions. Having vision on less factions will generally make your campaign a little bit more controlled and easy to manage anyway. So probably not bad advice in general, but especially until this gets patched, you definitely want to try to keep your vision radius small. When you get a new Age of Reckoning, you will get the option to delay it by 10 turns if you want, but you can only delay it once. And when it does come around after 10 turns, you'll have to get 20% more grudges next time. Bug number 2 is a lot simpler to explain. The way the confederations work with legendary lords in the new system is that you have this page in the Book of Grudges. It shows you how many total grudges each of the other lords have gotten so far, and you have to put right 15,000 total grudges more than their total. Once you've confederated one legendary lord, if you want to confederate a second one, it goes up by 15,000 each time. This already sounds pretty hard, but bear in mind you'll be getting tens of thousands of grudges solved every 10 turns, so the big numbers aren't as scary as they might seem. However, sometimes if the AI faction's doing really well and is really strong, they can almost be keeping up with you in the amount of grudges that they get. So if you leave one of the strong factions till late in the game, like Thorgrim, and perhaps if we imagine that on turn 100, Thorgrim's solved like 50,000 grudges, and meanwhile, if you've confederated 3 other factions, then you'll have to get his 50,000 plus another 60,000 more grudges on top of that. Let's say by turn 100, it's possible that you would actually be able to achieve that, but it's going to be easier if you confederate the stronger factions first, and then factions that have died and not achieved any grudges, you can just confederate them afterwards. It doesn't spend your grudges, it just goes by the total amount of grudges you have. So if we have our turn 100, 50,000 grudge Thorgrim, and you confederate him first, you just need to get 15,000 more, so 65. And then for your second lord, if you want to confederate Grombrindal, you need to get 30,000 more. But since Grombrindal died on turn 5 and he only got 1,000 grudges, you only need 31,000. So you could confederate Thorgrim and then immediately confederate Grombrindal as well, after the 5-turn cooldown. So if you want to get all of them, it's going to be better to wait and confederate the hardest ones first, and then confederate them in reverse order of how many grudges they have. But there is a problem. There's currently a bug where if you confederate any faction, even a minor faction, not using the grudge system at all, just using normal confederation, or even if you do it via one of the dilemmas that Belegar and Thoric get in their early game, that will immediately add 15,000 to the total that you need to confederate the legendary lords for each faction that you confederate. Again, Creative Assembly is aware of this bug. It'll hopefully be fixed really quickly, but in the meantime, don't confederate any minor factions and don't take the confederation dilemmas with either Thoric or Belegar at the start of the game if you intend on confederating any of the legendary lords, because that'll immediately delay it by 15,000 extra grudges. In closing, just want to say, don't be afraid of playing the dwarfs in 5.0. The new grudge system is really awesome. Once these fairly serious bugs are fixed, it's going to be even more awesome. But the updated grudge system is a really cool design, and it's a lot of fun, even with the current bugs. Shout out to Battlesy and the other creators that have raised these bugs and others during the early access period. Shout out to the devs at Creative Assembly for jumping on these bugs so quickly. Hopefully the patch will be coming soon.